We're very happy to be joined on the Milford Informer this week by Greg White. He is the General Counsel and Chief of Staff for the Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Greg, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Tim, thanks for having me. I appreciate you having me on the show.
So first and foremost, tell us a little bit about what you do and about the Office of Consumer Affairs.
Sure. A lot of folks, as we talked about before the show, have this misconception when they hear Consumer Affairs, immediately they think of the Attorney General's office. And although that plays an important role in what they do, they have the Consumer Protection Unit. We're a separate state agency. We like to say that they're the enforcer, we're the regulator. So we have 5 agencies under the Office of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation. And we have the Division of Insurance, which, amongst other things, regulates healthcare rates, as well as property insurance and auto insurance, among other things. We have the Division of Banks, which regulates state-chartered banks and credit unions, mortgage companies, debt collectors. A lot of people don't know about that. We oversee the Division of Standards, and the Division of Standards, we'll talk a little bit more as we go on about some of the fraud going on out there and how to protect your identity, but one of the big things is these skimming devices. Our Division of Standards is responsible for inspecting fuel pumps across the state. If you ever go and purchase gas, you'll see a sticker on that.
Sure, yeah.
They will go to the machines periodically, inspect them to make sure that what's being advertised is in fact going into your pump. They also inspect fuel trucks, price scanners at grocery stores, amongst other things. We have the Division of Professional Licensure, which oversees and regulates 375,000 tradespeople in Massachusetts, from veterinarians to chiropractors to electricians to social workers. They oversee a complaint process and a licensing process. And then lastly, we oversee the Department of Telecommunications and Cable, which amongst other things regulates the telecommunications and cable industry. So those are the agencies under the Office of Consumer Affairs, but in addition to that, Tim, we also have our own mandates. We oversee the lemon law arbitration. So if you've been aggrieved by purchasing a new or used car, you can file with our arbitration program. We oversee the data breach, which requires any entity out there that maintains and stores personal information, if that information is breached and involves Massachusetts citizens, they're required to notify us and the Attorney General's office the nature of the breach, how many citizens were impacted, and what they're doing to rectify it. In addition to that, we oversee the Home Improvement Contracting Program and Guaranteed Fund. What that does is that provides a level of protection for the consumer. We advise consumers that before entering into an agreement with a contractor, you make sure that they're in fact registered, and you enter into a written contract with certain specifications, which our office can provide both online or through a toll-free number to give the consumers information in terms of what to go into the contractor.
It goes to really the heart of why we asked you here today to talk about the various areas of identity theft, fraud, and cybersecurity. And I think it's eye-opening just hearing those different areas that you talked about right there. This is an issue that just feels like it continues to expand, and there are so many different areas that even now as a consumer you start to be more aware of just with what you see on the news and what you've probably experienced or what you've had a friend experience. But for all of the things that you know, there's all these different areas out there where you could become a victim of fraud or identity theft and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we were talking about before the show, it's not a question as to whether or not your information is going to be compromised in your lifetime. It's a question of when and how many times. You know, the reality is our information is everywhere. You go on Facebook, you Google someone, you can find out pretty much anything about anyone these days. Again, as we talked about before the show, you know, I began my career as a prosecutor in the Worcester DA's office, and back years ago when I was a young prosecutor, identity theft consisted of someone losing their wallet and them compromising the information. Now individuals don't even have to leave their home to obtain this information. This group, which I'll talk about in a moment, from Eastern Europe that is involved in the skimming devices, they're halfway around the world, and yet their consumers' information is being compromised. And so the way we learn of it is through a variety of ways. We maintain a toll-free number. We have 4 students from Northeastern Co-op program which man our hotline. And basically what they do is take calls from consumer. It's a terrific group of young men and women. And they're not in the business of offering legal advice, but what they'll do is if they can't answer the question, they'll direct you to the appropriate agency. And they field hundreds of calls, and we hear from consumers the types of identity theft that's going on out there. One of the most common, Tim, is the hackers, the ones that just hack into your system. And what we tell consumers is common sense. At the end of the day, protect your password and change it often, and use a name or a password that can't be easily identified with you, such as your last name or your mother's maiden name or what have you, and mix it up between lowercase and uppercase and both letters and numbers. Recently, I received a email from my brother who lives in Europe, and he said, "You need to change your password. Your password's been hacked." So I went on and I changed it, and I have 2 words and a number of numbers as part of it. And recently, my son and I were running a half marathon in Philadelphia, and just before the gun went off, I lost the iTunes, so I had to get into the system. So he said, "What's your password?" So he's putting it in. By the time he got the whole thing in, the gun went off and 10,000 people had gone by us. But the reality is, no one's going to get into my
Right.
system. So that's the most common type of identity theft. Then we have dumpster divers. I'm sure you're familiar with that term.
Oh, yeah.
And you would think in this day and age people would be more proactive, but the reality is people toss out old tax returns, bills, documents with your Social Security number, your date of birth on it. So we suggest that consumers invest in a paper shredder. You can get it at one of the local stores.
Sure.
It's cheap money and it protects your information. The other group that we see, and we talked about this earlier, the skimming devices. And we're seeing that our Division of Standards, our inspectors are finding them in gas stations throughout Massachusetts. We've had them around Boston. We've had them out in Worcester County. And what they're doing is they're going in and in the middle of the night, and they're blacking out the cameras, and they're opening the pump, and they're putting these skimming devices in, and they become very sophisticated. Back in the day when they would determine that a skimming device had been placed in a machine, local law enforcement would stake it out and wait for them to come back and retrieve it. Now they retrieve the information via Bluetooth. So they leave the device in there. It's cost of doing business, and it's just amazing the amount of information that they'll gather through this. We recently had a cybersecurity conference, and we had a member of the FBI in the Boston office, and he talked about an investigation that they conducted in upstate New York not too long ago. It involved a mom and pop store. They had put these skimming devices in. It was a group being operated out of Eastern Europe, and what they did is throughout the course of the summer season, it was a busy area, they had retrieved thousands of consumers' information. What they did is they distributed it worldwide with a caveat that don't release until a certain date and time, and then release the information. And within hours, millions of dollars had been lost. Wow. And that's just one entity. And we're finding them not only in gas pumps, but we're finding them at ATM machines. We had a credit union down in the South Shore around the first of the year. They found a skimming device in there, and hundreds of consumers' information had been compromised. So we ask consumers to be somewhat vigilant in terms of their approach. When you go to a gas pump, you'll see a seal on it. If that seal has been breached or broken, notify the proprietor. One of the areas that our co-ops field questions in are the scams that are taking place out there. And,
right.
and most of them folks have been aware of for years. The most common is the IRS scam, which I'm sure you've heard of.
Of course.
You know, we recently learned that there's a group operating out of Seattle, Washington, and we've had people within our own agency that have been called on that. And
so this is essentially, you'll get a phone call either on your cell phone or
Yep.
on your home phone, and it will be someone posing as an IRS official, and they're asking you for money, saying that you owe money.
Basically, they're saying that you are subject to criminal prosecution, that you owe back taxes, and you need to contact this number. And when you contact the number, there'll be an individual on the line who's going to attempt to retrieve some information from you and get you to commit to wiring $5,000. And you know, the reality is the IRS doesn't operate that way. They don't make phone calls. So when in doubt, pick up the phone. You know, but it's amazing how many folks, especially the elderly, will become victim of that type of scam. The grandparent scam, I'm sure you're familiar with that. Again, our information is everywhere. What they'll do is they'll go online and they'll learn about grandparents' family, that their grandchildren are studying abroad, learn a little bit about the school and whatnot, and then they'll reach out to that individual and they'll say that, you know, we're calling from this country. We recently had one in which the family member received a call from Europe saying that their grandson had been detained and that they needed to wire, you know, $5,000 to post the bond. One of our officials at the Office of Consumer Affairs had his mother-in-law receive a call. Her grandson was studying down in Atlanta. And again, they said he had been detained and he needed to wire. So she went to the local Western Union. And fortunately, there was a individual behind there who fortunately, they're properly trained and they're told to identify situations like this. And he said, you know, ma'am, I'd like to take your money, but this is a scam. So she left that store and she went to another entity and they took the money and she lost $5,000. So, wow. I mean, it's been around for years, but the reality is people are still being victimized by it. And then you have the fake lottery scam, which again has been around for years. Recently, the Boston Globe published an article about a group of individuals who had been victimized by the scam, one of which was an individual who lost thousands of dollars. Basically, he had been approached by 3 separate entities saying that he had won the lottery, and all he had to do is pay the taxes. And then he received another call from a 4th entity who said, listen, we understand that you just won 3 lotteries. By law, you can't collect them, more than one in any given calendar year. But if you join our association, we'll enable you. And he lost thousands of dollars. So if it's too good to be true, in all likelihood it is.
Sure, it's such an important rule of thumb, it seems like it comes down to. And really, listening to all of these different stories, I'm sure that there are people out there who think to themselves, well, identity theft maybe targets one age group more than another, whether it's older folks who maybe leave their password vulnerable online, or a younger crowd who maybe trusts a public Wi-Fi signal or trusts leaving their information accessible on a public terminal. But really, the way these scams unfold, it seems like everyone really could be a target at any time.
Absolutely. I mean, short of you know, getting rid of your credit cards and your ATM cards and just dealing in cash and not going on online. You know, again, the reality is, it's not a question of if your information is going to be compromised. It's a question of when and how many times. And there's certain things that the banks have put into place, the chip and pin that protects the information. But just as we were talking about before the show, just when you get a level of protection, they find a way to circumvent it.
Right.
So we advise consumers just to use common sense and learn to protect your information. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we've come up, and I brought a few for you, Tim. Those are protective sleeves. You put your credit card in there. What they'll do is, in addition to using these devices in ATM machines and gas pumps, they will approach people at bus terminals, train station, malls, and whatnot with skimming devices. And what they'll do is rub up against you, and they'll capture all your information. By putting the credit card in these sleeves, it protects the information. The other thing we came up with is this protective sleeve for passports. Since 2007, there's a chip in your passport with all your personal information. Again, they'll swipe up against you.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't even realize that.
They don't, and yet it goes on all the time. So those can be very helpful. Lastly, this scam may or may not be something you're aware of. Have you heard of the One Ring scam?
I'm not sure I have.
Okay, all right. I hadn't until recently, until I became a victim of it. What they'll do is they will call you from one of the Caribbean nations, and they'll have your cell phone, and they'll let it ring once, and then they'll hang up. And most people can't get to the ring in one take, and so they'll, out of curiosity, call back. They'll keep you on the line. The longer they have you on the line, they'll ring up a outrageous phone bill. And it's a group operating around the world, and it's called the One Ring scam. So
Wow.
if you don't recognize the number, let them call back.
Sure.
So those are the various types of identity thefts that our co-ops learn about day in and day out, as well as the various scams that are going on. And again, we advise consumers to protect your information, to change the passwords often, to invest in a paper shredder, and do your best to use common sense.
And obviously those are the great ways to try to manage yourself, to put yourself at as low a risk as possible. Should you realize that you've become a victim of identity theft, what are kind of the steps that you have to take there moving forward?
Well, you can reach out to local law enforcement. I was on a show not too long ago, and it was the chief of police, and he said, Greg, we get quite a few calls, and our hands are somewhat tied. Again, some of these folks are operating halfway across the world. But you can notify local law enforcement, cancel the credit card right away, notify the bank, and the bank will, in fact, reimburse you. And then you can go online and get a credit report. And you should monitor your credit report once a year. Recently, my wife and I were having some work done on our home, and the contractor, a person that worked for the contractor, learned of the office I was with, and we were talking about cybersecurity and identity theft, and she said, yeah, not too long ago, I went to refinance, and I got a copy of my credit report, and I learned that someone had obtained my information, and with my information had purchased a condominium in my name with my information and leased a brand new car. She said, but for that fact, apparently they had been making the payments, but when they defaulted, next thing you know, she's going to be receiving calls. So, but for the fact that she had gone on and gotten the credit report, she wouldn't have known about that. So.
And people can get a free credit report each year from one of the various organizations.
Exactly, and we advise consumers that they should do it once a year at least, and then you can put freezes on your credit through these credit agencies that protect your information going forward.
Well, that's, again, this is really valuable information for absolutely everybody out there in our viewing audience. If folks want to learn more about the particular work you're doing, how can they access that information?
They can. We have two numbers. We have a toll-free number, which is 1-888-283-3757, and our local number of Boston is 1-617-973-8899. 8787. And again, we have 4 outstanding co-ops who will take the phone calls and attempt to answer your question. And if they can't, they'll direct you to the appropriate agency.
Well, Greg, we can't thank you enough. This is tremendous information, and it's a scary subject, no question about it, but it's important that people really learn, know what safeguards they can take, and know that if this ultimately does happen, there are avenues that they have from there. But again, we thank you so much for your time. We really thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Tim, and I appreciate you having me on the show.